So, guys, I want to talk about the character Steve Urkel a little bit. And I was watching some clips of Family Matters, and I want to mention that I did watch some of the episodes in the 1990s when it came out, but not really all of the episodes, but I think one thing that's kind of like really striking is Steve Urkel's character and what does he really teach? Because I think that the big lesson we learned from Steve Urkel is that you got to be kind of true to yourself. But I also kind of think that sometimes one of the messages I think that gets a little convoluted is just his relationship with Laura. Like he's kind of really devoted to her, but he also kind of has a very like stalker obsession to her. And I know like sometimes in the 1990s, especially, that if a boy has a crush on a girl, you stick out your lips and do kissy like stuff, or sometimes you like sing to her, or sometimes you like kind of watch her in her house or whatever. Because I remember like there's an episode of King of the Hill, where Bobby is always like having binoculars, seeing what Connie is doing, almost like observing her as a guardian angel. But nowadays we will call that stalking. And also when Laura says no or no way, it's very interesting that Steve Urkel doesn't give his pursuit over time really, because it is kind of even though like is a friend of the family, that's just not an appropriate relationship, and especially since Laura's dad is a police officer, he has to say no, Steve. She said no the first time, and that's going to be it. So I do think that maybe one of the bad things this whole series teaches is really just how if somebody's not into you, never give up and always be there for that person. But even though like there is a friendship thing, there's also a sense of very dangerous obsessions, and I really think that there's a lot of just examples of it. I think one of the examples is that like when Steve Urkel's on TV, he's like talking about his love to Laura and he's kissing the camera. There's also like there's also just like many things too. Like he's like saying like my darling or whatever, or just like singing outside of her on door her singing outside of her room or whatever. So so obsessive is very serious, because there are some people who don't realize that could be stalking. There's some people that don't realize that could be creepy, that could be harassment, and then there's some people like who may not realize that there may be a mental illness that they have, where it's like I can't let go of somebody for whatever reason. And what we always have to understand is that we get to respect what other people want. So if somebody wants nothing to do with me, they want nothing to do with me. I can't be like, you know what, well, it's the thrill of the hunt. It's I know my intuition so well that things are going to work out, because things are going to work out when you get a restraining order on your ass and you're in prison and you're charged with being a sex offender. So that's not what anybody wants really. But I do think that for the series, I think that almost like I think Steve and Laura get married at the end of the series. I do think that does send a bad message in one way, of just saying that if you don't give up on somebody who wants nothing to do with you, eventually they're gonna give in and you get married. And I really have to say this, that I know and I believe this is very true, that sometimes when people are toxically persistent in social relationships, especially decades ago, centuries ago, or whatever, that's usually how those relationships happen. Like the person says, "Oh well, you know what? Because you're even taught literature or whatever. Oh well, that person is swooning over me, therefore I'm going to eventually fall in love with them, even if I play hard to get." Really, sometimes it's not just hard to get; it's just I don't want anything to do with you. We have different personalities, or you're coming off in a creepy way, so I'm never going to change my mind about you. And that's also very important, because there's a lot of I think in the 90s there wasn't a lot of education on that, but nowadays with Me Too and everything like that, there is more education and more like women speaking out, because there's always been that role of women being really patient with men that are hitting on them, and sometimes tolerating maybe obsessive treatment. But so it's good to hear from their perspectives, but it's also kind of important that we understand that very clearly, if somebody says no, no means no, and that's not just sexual consent. That's just, oh well, I want nothing to do with you because you're socially awkward or you have issues, or I don't think we're compatible, and letting that person go, even though it may be hard and whatever, and that's a very important part of life. But I think that Family Matters with the Urkel character, it's unfortunately very reflective of the time of the '90s, where that type of obsessiveness over a girl to a point where she feels uncomfortable, and there are no consequences for his behavior, and he's almost like it goes over everybody's head. That's very concerning, and it's also concerning that her father is a cop and he says nothing, and then also too that it doesn't help Steve at all really, because it just says what would happen if Steve and Laura have a son or daughter that's the same way, and Myrtle Urkel, even though that's a character of Steve, it's still that same idea of she can pucker her lips and she can just jump in and have a relationship with anybody, and that could be somebody who is a man who knows how to play the sexual assault card. That could be somebody who's naive and then they get sexually assaulted, or that could be somebody that's like, okay, well, I know that that you're attracted to me, so I'm going to hurt you and do something horrible to you because I know that you're into me and you're letting your guard down. So I do think that there always has to be sense when you do shows like this. I like the pros and cons of every character, and I do think the big con of Steve Urkel is that he really represents like somebody with obsessiveness in a relationship, somebody who has a stalker complex, and also somebody that really reads as possibly developmentally delayed. A lot of people could say Asperger's syndrome. There's a huge argument for that. And part of that is developmental delay and not understanding social cues or what behavior is antisocial. So I do have to. So that's how I really feel about it. So I do think that it's definitely very concerning. But I also think that when you look at Steve Urkel, like obviously it is a comedy about somebody who just doesn't give up on somebody that they love. But and while that's funny, like understand that it's also important to know that that person just has to love you back before you kind of be silly like Steve Urkel. You can't just do it to a stranger, do it to somebody who already said, you know what, I don't want to take it that far. It may be painful, but you have to just respect people's wishes. And the Urkel character really doesn't do that with Laura.